Well, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is now out of the waiting room and into the meeting room. So good evening and welcome to the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre's Tuesday Talks. First of all, just give me a wave if you can hear me okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you for waving back to me. Thank you. So my name is Anne Treherne and I'm founder of the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. So it's my great pleasure to be chairing this meeting for you this evening. And another exciting meeting we have tonight because we have Steve Mera with us. So welcome, Steve. Thank you for being with us this evening. Now, Steve has, I introduced Professor Chris Rowe just a fortnight ago and I said, he's got a really long CV. Well, I think this one's even longer. So Steve has more than 30 years experience in investigating the paranormal. And he's the authority on it, I would say. Because I don't think there's a subject area within the paranormal that he has not investigated. And he's going to talk about some of that tonight. He's a founder of the scientific establishment of parapsychology. He's owner of Phenomenon magazine. If you haven't seen that, it's excellent. Have a look for that. Phenomenon magazine. Is a prolific author and is a freelance journalist and is an international lecturer, amongst lots of other things. He's done lots of investigations, as I've already mentioned, some corporate investigations, which are handled very confidentially. He's also a TV and radio host. He did me the great accolade of inviting me to be on Coast to Coast. He interviewed me on Coast to Coast. So it's lovely to be able to reciprocate, Steve, and have you back here this evening. So that is the shortened CV because I could go on. It is lengthy. He's a very experienced person in this field. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Steve for the study of paranormal mechanics. So welcome, Steve, and over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you to everybody who's turned up tonight. We're just going to be talking about paranormal mechanics. I mean, it's a little piece of the puzzle in regarding the whole range of phenomena, really. I mean, because the word paranormal is just such a bad word because it just consists of too much, far too much. So we have to kind of start breaking it down. For me, it's about looking at individual aspects of paranormal phenomena. And when I say paranormal phenomena, it's not just hauntings, it's not just poltergeist disturbances. You know, it covers a vast area and it covers about 68% of aerial phenomena. There's a certain large amount of paranormal attributes, which I think it's important for anybody who's in the study in the field of the paranormal recognizes those paranormal attributes because they are one of the same in many areas. So let me just start my PowerPoint. Okay, can everybody see that okay? That looks good. Okay, so...
No, we're not seeing that. Hold on.
You're not seeing it, Anne?
No. Scott, can we share that screen again?
We had it.
If you would just click share screen,
Steve.
Oh, sorry, I'd have to click share screen again, don't I? Share screen, sorry. Okay, let me see if...
That's it, we're seeing it now, thank you. That's good.
Is that good?
That's it, yeah, thank you.
Okay,
good.
Wonderful. Technology. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too much. I've got a lot to cover in such a short time, so forgive me for not diving in deeply into each and every subtopic here. But obviously, if there is questions at the end, I'm quite happy to take them. But SEP was the Scientific Establishment of Parapsychology was formed in 1996, and it's basically to investigate and research on a scientific basis disturbances, what we might refer to as paranormal. But in 1996, that's kind of all we really covered, you know, the disturbances, people reporting things, you know, bumps in the night, and everybody's heard those stories, you know. But we wanted to stay clear away from being any ghost hunter type material because, you know, there was a bit of a bad rap associated to that through the media. And I think many people would agree with me on that. How I kind of stumbled into doing corporate investigation started with this particular case. What you're seeing here is a picture of Sunlight House, 14 floors, huge building in Manchester. And at the time, it was owned by the Ministry of Defence and Cortilla Properties. And I ended up with a phone call just out of the blue one day, and this is back in probably around about 97, February 97. And it was a Manchester Public Relations Office asking if we could conduct a corporate investigation. And when you say corporate, that's highly amount of confidentiality is involved. And we went into this quite blindly doing the first corporate investigation. We didn't realize actually what we got ourselves into. But we had 36 investigators, and we all had to not be investigators because there was staff working around the clock. And they didn't want them to know that we were investigating the building because of the disturbances there. What had happened, a number of staff had reported, and it had gone up to management level, about that they don't want to work in certain areas of the building. They certainly won't work past certain times of the evening because of what they've experienced. And it became what you might refer to is a problem, a business problem. And when a manager is dealt with this, they've got to consider, well, what are they going to do? How do they deal with the situation and keep it confidential at the same time? So in came we, and we had 36 investigators, and we had to pose as electrical engineers. And that means yellow hard hats. We had tool belts on. We had measuring equipment. And what we were doing is we were doing from basement to the roof, a full survey, electromagnetic survey carried out. But of course, everybody just thought we were electrical engineers, and that was how it went for about 2 months of doing a full survey of the building. That led us into we ended up being on a database. This was just our first case, corporate investigation. We've done many resident ones. But we ended up on some sort of database. And what happened from that is that when large companies seeked out information, they got details from a public relations office, which obviously passed their information around the country. And our phone started ringing more and more often. And it was corporate companies that wanted us to participate or help them, assist them in some form or manner in regarding disturbances which were causing issues in regarding work and management. Over the years, we worked with the police, we worked with crime units, we worked with CID in the Susie Lamper case in London. We'd worked for breweries and public houses, inns and hotels, stores, shops, supermarkets. Supermarkets, believe it or not, are very common. We've done about 19 investigations in various large supermarket stores around the country, including Edinburgh. Football and rugby grounds. There was a new rugby ground that was built in Salford, Manchester, and we investigated disturbance there. We investigated on behalf of Manchester City Football Club, their own ground, railway stations, churches, housing associations, and private landlords. Now, those were very interesting because the tenants tend to have more rights than the landlords these days, and they were reporting paranormal disturbances, which makes the environment unfit to live in. Therefore, they don't need to pay rent anymore, and it leaves the council a massive, massive problem about what do we do. Not only subdued any media about this, because they don't want media, they want to rent their homes at the end of the day, they don't want to lose money. And secondly, how did he help the client? How did he help the tenants? And it was because we became involved in housing associations and private landlords, we designed and wrote an 83-page protocol. That protocol is for the clients. That is for the housing associations, the private landlords. Those people are the clients. And what we would do is guide them how to deal with a situation like this, because it has to be a protocol. Because first thing first is that you've got to be quickly reach an agreement that there's no media interest in this, that the parties involved aren't going to go to the media, that it is a controlled situation, is kept quiet, an investigation or research takes place to warrant if they require relocation. And if they are required relocation due to evidence of paranormal disturbances of one sort or the other, then those buildings are left what we refer to as fallow. We cut the building off from any electrical input coming in. That's at the 3-phase coming into the building, right at the point. And we leave it empty, void of any human agencies in there for 12 months, a full year. It's basically boarded up, left, and it's very, there's no electrical energies in there whatsoever, in hope of suppressing or ridding the phenomena. And it has been successful many times. And there was about 62 different parts of this protocol that they follow in a certain order. And at the end of that, you end up with a happy client, you end up with a happy tenant, and obviously a confidentiality assurance policy and document. These CAP documents are very important. They last for 10 years. In other words, it's highly confidential for 10 years. If they do not contact us back after the 10-year period time comes up, then we have the rights to disclose certain information. But we still would always look after certain people regarding not releasing names and addresses and things like that. In this case, this became public after 10 years, and the disturbances were quite bad. I mean, people, I'll just give you one scenario. A young lady went out the office to the female toilets. She was in there on her own, and she was in the cubicle, and she heard someone come in, heavy footsteps, and there was a small gap under the door. It was one of those type of cubicles, and she clearly felt it was a male presence. Heavy boots were being worn. The boots came right up to the door where she could actually see the boots below the little part of the door where she was in the cubicle, and she could see them moving. Definitely male boots. But then something quite profound happened. Whatever this was, it moved forward so much that the boots almost came under the door, and she would have expected to see at least half the torso coming through the door, but it wasn't. Just these boots came right under, and she was screaming. At that point, she screamed the place down, and she kept on screaming until this thing moved away. It went quiet, and of course, she got out of there and she reported it straight away. And she immediately said she was never going to be working at that side of the building. She wants to relocate to the other side, and obviously that affected her work skills because she wouldn't work past a certain time. And especially that's problematic in the UK when it goes dark about 3 o'clock in the winter. So, and that was just one of 34, 35 reported incidents. What was really interesting was 2,500 pages from the 24-hour security teams, which not only gave chase to who they thought was people that broke in until they ran through a solid door or wall. Tools were thrown around, equipment was being moved, the elevator was constantly being called upon from different floors. And I had 2,500 pages of security officers' notes, because they have a handoff notes. And what those mean are, when they finish their shift, they have to write down everything about that night so that the following guy takes over him, he reads and he carries on, and he sends a report. And this cycle of reports continues over and over. And there were some amazing things in those reports. So yes, it was a very, what you might refer to as paranormally infested location, but the whole building was built like an antenna. Deep beneath the building is the old canals of Manchester, and buried deep within them are huge metal girders, huge. I mean, you're talking about 18 foot, these metal girders, they're huge. And they go deep into the ground. The whole thing is acting like a geomagnetic antenna. After reshuffling officers around, lowering EMF, which was spiking at ridiculous amounts of EMF in certain locations, we managed to bring down or suppress some of the phenomena. We wasn't completely able to suppress it all. The disturbances still continued to a degree, but then we went through a form of questioning, and a number of staff were counselled at the time, especially those that working for Ministry of Defence. And we had to sign an Official Secrets Act to do this particular investigation. So this is kind of how we got involved. And once we'd done this case, all these other things started flooding in, including farms, councils, construction companies. I had one construction company that put hands down, we're not working here because we're working very close to this church and there's ghosts there. And, construction company calls in somebody to try and assess what the situation is. Turned out to be ignis fatuus, swamp gas, believe it or not, and I actually photographed it as well, which is very rare. Companies, office blocks are a particular one, and other business throughout the UK. As you can see, we have a confidential assurance policy, the CAP document, which is signed. It goes for 10 years. We offer the guidelines, the protocols, the process of dealing with concerning media. In other words, if something does get out, how do we suppress it? How to obtain a speedy resolve for the clients. Investigation, research, analysis report submitting to clients. They obtain a full report, advice, guidance, and support. That was what kind of SCP got involved in. We conducted, and still are conducting, but we did most of our corporate confidential case investigations for almost 17 years. It was 16 and a half years working around the country secretively without anybody knowing, and conducting investigations on behalf of, well, Tesco's, Asda, Woolworths. They've all had a shot in this. Even one supermarket, which was in Edinburgh. That's not a real photograph of the supermarket, by the way. They weren't allowed to show the original supermarket. And I was approached whilst I was at Peter Broughton's excellent Scottish Paranormal Festival in Stirling by two ladies who worked for Stirling Council and wanted to arrange with me for them to obtain our protocol and for us to go through with them. They too now, I believe, are operating with our protocol. They do have it. And we've only talked with them once since then. So it's just another thing which they've reached out. Obviously, maybe somebody in Stirling had reported incidents, and councils are there to try and assist and help their tenants. So it's a difficult scenario what to deal with at the time. When it said working with the police, this was one particular investigation that took place in Southampton. I met with a police officer. We were contacted by the police, and this was a profound disappearance. A gentleman in question, who works at an office, had just recently had a child with his wife, been in this home for 6 years. The little boy, who was only 3 months old at the time, and he'd just been promoted and got a new company car, a nice green Rover at the time. And on a Friday night, he used to like to go out occasionally with his friends. And on this particular Friday night, he came in, had his tea, and he said to his wife, "I'm going to get changed because I'm going to go out with friends." He wanted to show off his new company car. And he went upstairs and he went very quiet. In fact, his wife thought had he gone? Had he left without saying goodbye? Which was very strange of him to do. She went to the bottom of the stairs, shouted up, there was no answer. And she thought he was having a joke on her. I remember her telling me, I was walking around the top upstairs saying, "If you jump out the cupboard, I'm going to kill you." I'm thinking it was some type of joke that her husband was playing on it. He wasn't in the house. In fact, his car keys were still on the side upstairs and he hadn't got changed. Car was still outside the house. She hadn't heard or seen him leave. And that was a very profound situation because he didn't come back. He didn't come back until 2 days later. So the police were involved because she'd rang the police and they go through a process of a certain length of time has to pass before it passes onto the database system, just in case for some reason that there's a rational explanation. And 2 days later, he turns up. And it's the most strangest thing. She's in the kitchen. She's had her family round. She's been upset. She's been crying. She's been worrying. She doesn't know what's going on. And her and her sister are in the kitchen with the baby, and they hear a bang upstairs. They look at each other. She goes to the bottom of the stairs and she shouts up, who's up there, sort of thing. And the reply was from her husband. And she couldn't believe what she heard. She ran up. She flung her arms around him and was absolutely sobbing, "Where have you been? What's happened? What's going on?" And he had absolutely no recollection of where he'd been. Absolutely no recollection according to police details. And this is prior to my involvement taken in consideration. I'll tell you the reasons why I got involved in a minute. Now, he had no idea where he'd been. He thought he even actually booked himself into a hospital because he didn't even recall that 2 days had passed. And once he was proven so that it was that date, and he realized that I don't have any memory of 2 days, he actually had made an appointment at the doctor's to try and book himself into hospital. He's thinking that he had some type of problem, psychological problem, or I needing a CAT scan or something like that. So he was quite concerned, and he just couldn't understand what had actually happened. They tried their best to put it out in their minds until about 8 or 9 days later. Exactly the same incident happened. He went upstairs and it went quiet. And she intrinsically thought to go to the bottom of the stairs. She knew something wasn't quite right. Again, she shouted up and her husband had gone. Now, taking into consideration, this was 1998. He never returned. He never returned. And this is when I got involved, when the crime unit got involved, because she was actually going under a lot of stress because of the questioning. She was even under suspicion. I mean, all her family were under suspicion at that time as to where he'd gone to. But because they had a prior report of an incident similar, only about just over a week prior, they thought it was very profound. The police had no explanation. It was a shell case. And she could not afford to stay at the house because she didn't work and she was looking after a child. She refused to move. And in fact, it was all her family that clubbed in to pay the mortgage. And she's still there today. And the child is not a 3 months old. You can well imagine it was 1998. And she still refuses to move and believes her husband will return one day. Now, I have no explanation for this. Absolutely no explanation, apart from possibly trying to figure out some form of a rational explanation of why he needed to disappear. But he had no debts, and he was he loved his job. He'd just got promoted. He'd just had a child. Didn't seem to have the lifestyle of living a double life, because all his time was took up with his work and his family. And the police couldn't find, even the psychologists that worked for the police could not find any information why such an incident might happen. She actually is still living there. I talked to the Southampton Police Department involved in this case maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. I was told she's still living there and they've not heard any more. The case is still shelved and they've no explanation. So it just goes to show you there are some strange things, and we don't know if they are paranormal in nature, but certainly you can get involved. The police contacted me because I'd been involved in researching disappearances, but not like this. I mean, this was quite profound. I wanted to know if we had any ideas what we might be able to trigger the investigation being reopened. We didn't. We didn't have any information that could assist and open that police investigation again. As far as I'm aware, last time I talked to the police officer was 7 years ago. She's still there, waiting for her husband to return one day. And if he does, will he even look the same, or will he have even the knowledge of him going? We don't know. And there was nothing unusual, no unusual activity in the house, nothing I could find and measure with on devices. It's just one of those strange things that is left unknown. This is one investigation we did in Sainsbury's down in Kent. And again, it's a really strange one. We were contacted by them because there were reports of one particular car park space which was causing damage to vehicles. Yeah, it sounds very weird, doesn't it? I mean, I love weird things, and this one spiked my interest straight away. I said, "What do you mean? Explain what's that mean?" Well, the people that had reported parking into one particular place in the Sainsbury's car park would suddenly hit something quite hard, and yet there was nothing there to see. And when they walked to the front of the vehicle, could see their damage, broken headlights, bumper damaged. They were hitting something, but couldn't see anything nor feel anything. And this is just 2 photographs out of the 6 cars apparently it happened to. And the manager got really interested in this and wanted to hear about people who'd had that experience in this particular car space. And we had no explanation for it. We went down there, and of course I I was talked into parking my vehicle in there about a few times, but luckily I didn't hit anything. And I have no explanation for it, none at all. I mean, there are some vague reports of phantom barriers. There's some old stories that, these invisible walls and things, but it tends to be linked more to mythology than anything else. And most of that mythology comes from Ireland. But the only thing I found of interest was the fact that Sainsbury's, which was relatively new at the time, was built on a land which was an old Irish pub, and their land, the grass land and the car park. That was the only connection I could have. Maybe something to do with being Irish mythology. I really don't know. And to resolve the problem, we had the big bottle bins placed into that car park area, and it's there now. If you actually travel to Sainsbury's in Kent, you'd go into the car park and you'd say, isn't that really strange? One of the car park spaces is taken up by massive big bottle bins. And they've actually purposely left that there. There hasn't been, as far as I'm aware, any other reported incidents of that. And it's truly quite profound, the physical damage to the vehicle, as if it did hit something. There was never any insurance claims put forward to Sainsbury's, as you could well imagine. It'd be a bit difficult to prove, but nonetheless, though, there were 6 people that reported those incidents in that very same car park place. And these are just 2 of the photographs that damage to the vehicles. I love the weird and the strange. I don't like to tend to talk about, the normalities of what we tend to hear in the paranormal. This is another really strange one. Back in the late 80s, in a place called Abney Hall, on the grounds of Abney Hall, which is in Cheadle, near Stockport. It was a lovely summer's day, and a local karate team had decided to hold an event there at the field at the back of the hall. And parents and friends were asked to come along to watch their children do karate scenes and maneuvers, and that was like kind of a little bit of a show. And it was very good. Quite a number of parents turned up and family, and they watched their young children from 6 years of age up to 14 years of age in their set classes with three instructors there, perform maneuvers and do things for the visitors. And it was all going very well until one of the instructors heard the bushes move slightly, and he thought there was some young kids in there messing about, kids that were not part of their team, but maybe from elsewhere, and were just playing tricks and things, and they were making funny noises and shaking the bushes nearby, and it was a bit of a distraction. After ignoring it a couple of times, he decided to go over to the bush and looked in there to find nothing. There was nothing in there. So he left it at that, and a few minutes later, another instructor from the other side of the green also started to experience some strange movement within the bushes and unusual noises. Now, it gets a little bit grey here. When you start to try and find out exactly what happened, you got a number of varied stories, but they all seem to tie in together. That they claim to have seen small figures the size of children dressed in ninja-type clothing, of all things, at least 8 of these figures, and acting profoundly unusual. And when I say acting profoundly unusual, what happened was there was a total a breakdown of communication and the event. One of the instructors was apparently tried to drown himself in the local pond, which is just next to the back green, which was only a couple of feet deep. So it's not very, he had to be dragged out. He didn't know, he had no idea what he was doing. A few of the people attending attacked each other without any reason or knowledge of doing so, like they'd completely lost control. Especially one girl who was a 19-year-old who lashed out fighting a boyfriend and had no recollection of why or how and everything, why she'd done it. Then there were some of these figures that were seen floating above where the water marking is, and they had this large stone there, and they were seen floating over that. Clearly, it was quite a profound incident. Now, I wouldn't really have believed any of this if I hadn't seen the police reports and the ambulance reports, the details from the hospital. Several people had to be taken to hospital. The police turned up as well. It was a right focus that went on. They couldn't understand what was going on, but were they under besieged by these small beings dressed like ninjas, the size of children, and seemingly had paranormal abilities, and also would cause people to completely lose their minds and attack each other, or even attempt to drown themselves. The details are quite hefty on the report, the police report. It was from 1988, I believe. But there was a spate of those same incidents at the back of Abney Hall. This is where Agatha Christie once stayed. And there was absolutely no explanation we can find for it. But it went on for quite some time. It wasn't just this event, and I thought it was. You can see the area here. This is the stone, and this is where it was seen floating. There's no pictures of Abney Hall, but these odd dwarf-like figures dressed like ninjas apparently were responsible for the attacking of children and adults, even the instructors. And this is, like I say, this was 1988, so it's in the latter 80s. It was 1988, the incident. But what was interesting, as you can see here, on 2012, I received an email, and it's just basically said, "Hi, I'd like to just comment on the Abney Hall post. Back in 1988, I was 13 and a pupil of Parswood High School, just near Abney Hall. Me and my friends spent lots of time at Abney Hall, and on many occasions, both myself and my friends saw these black ninja-type figures. They were definitely there around that time. We were even chased by one on our bikes. My friend saw one on the roof. I saw most on the bushes around the lawn area in front of the house, near the little stream. They were definitely a menacing presence. Very strange, thanks, Simon Godfrey." You know, and he is not the only witness who lived local growing up who experienced those very same events. So as to what these things are, I have no idea. I wrote a very interesting article and I titled it "Attack of the Ninja Dwarfs." So, you know, and that really got some people's attention. But I have no explanation for it, absolutely none. And I cannot find anything in the history of Abney Hall to give me any ideas as to what those things could have been. Very mysterious. But when it comes to doing investigations for councils and landlords, we have to take into consideration that, you know, sometimes you're going to come across the stereotypical type hauntings. But in this particular case, we're dealing with three flats, one above the other, which were adversely affected by the phenomena. And this is when we identified the mechanics of what is referred to as a column type haunting, where the affected area of one particular home is the same place as the affected area above it, and so on. And it was exactly the same location of those homes where the phenomena was taking place in three different stories, one above the other, which was quite interesting because we hadn't come across that before, these column effect haunting. You know, maybe they just don't get many cases like that where homes are above each other like flats, or it's just not reported very often. But we did identify and note that activity was taking place on all three floors in the very same location of those homes. So that had to be dealt. It was like three investigations in one, in a sense of speaking. We did manage to sort that out though for them, because luckily they were actually due to have new kitchens fitted and things. So the council did relocate at least 8 people out of these homes. Whilst they're having a complete renovation, that was central heating and new kitchens being put in. But yes, column effect hauntings, they don't come across them very often, but they're interesting. Whilst in Seattle doing the investigation under SCP, we noted that the poltergeist disturbances were seemingly worked hand in hand with vexation cycles. People who get stressed are somehow as a key tied in, or should we say, with the phenomena's activity. So of course, the more vexation that's created, just like in poltergeist disturbances, the more vexation, the more phenomena is seemingly witnessed. And as we know, poltergeists are very resourceful. They always want us to experience that phenomena so that we induce vexation, so that they utilize vexation for the next event. There's even been cases where puddles of water manifestations have seemingly disappeared before the next act takes place. So whatever was utilizing the energies to create a forming of water was utilized for the next act. But in this case, the disturbances were quite bad. The whole home was being wrecked by what I could only assume was a poltergeist type disturbance at that time. But there was a number of interesting things which we could measure and photograph. This is impacts on walls from high velocity objects. This could be a candle, for an example, that disappeared and wasn't found again. You look for 2 or 3 days, disappeared. And then suddenly there was a very loud bang from upstairs, and he'd found his candle. It was on the floor with a hole in the wall. So wherever this had apported to, I believe the apports are usually quite local because they're very resourceful poltergeists. And I tend to think that they're probably hidden under the floor or in the walls. It's less energy is probably required to manipulate them from one location to another. But these high velocity objects would fling themselves against the wall, causing damage. And you actually see where he's been plastering up, from previous damage. This was a regular occurrence in Seattle for him. And there was a number of specialized tests that took place. One of them was a stroboscopic motion camera detection test. This is referred to as a saccade, an optokinetics test, which we run at 50 to 60 milliseconds with an oscillation frequency of around about 20 hertz on a specialized camera that detects and photographs. And on a number of occasions, we've captured anomalies, as we can see the standard photograph to these 3 photographs to the left, capturing anomalies upstairs when nobody was there, and the camera's actually triggered for some reason under these conditions, and capturing these anomalies. So when we have phenomena which is quite high, it's a good chance to conduct specialized testing to try and break things down, to look at the mechanics of how things are actually working.
Very sensitive, very high sensitive vibration detectors.
This is in the same location.
In place. One just here and one on the bed frame as well, because of repulsive vibrations. I'm going to leave them as they are, as you can see. I'm going to shut the door and I'll seal it off. Okay.
And that's exactly what we did. Now, this is the client's bedroom, reporting that the bed was vibrating. So, of course, first thing to do is put very high sensitive vibration detectors on the bed and the bed frame. We left the room, we sealed the room off with specialized tape. In other words, you cannot get into that room without us knowing, because it's special tape that leaves a mark when broken. So we knew nobody had been in there. There was absolutely a void from any human agencies in there. And what we found, this is how we set them up, one on the bed frame, one on the bottom of the bed there. And we sealed the door and off we went. I'd say about maybe 30 minutes later, in the next room, the passive infrared went off. And we don't know why it went off. It could have been a glitch on the actual passive infrared detector. But just as we were coming out of the bedroom next door, we heard the vibration detector go off. So we unsealed the door and walked in, and this particular one, which was on the side of the bed frame, was now here on the floor. It moved probably about 18 inches, fallen off, come over here, upside down on the floor in alert state. Now, taking in consideration, we'd already swept the whole home for geomagnetic and EMF, any anomalies. So there was nothing unusual, nothing at all. I mean, it was less than 1 Gauss, which was background radiation. But this incident, whatever caused this to move, and there is no vibration that would have done that it left a footprint of EMF in that particular area. So what we actually see there then is that what's basically happened.
Can I just put it on the floor?
what's basically happened there is that the incident had left a footprint of EMF. Now it was 0.8 Gauss to be normal sweeping, but just in that location where the incident happened, it reached up to 9 Gauss. And it stayed like that for about just over 2 hours and 15 minutes until it just basically switched off. It just dissipated extremely fast. Conducting further tests of EMF in that bedroom, there was never anything else, but only affected that location where the incident had happened. So what we noted was that does an item move from one location to the other affect the environment in some way? Maybe not physically, or should we visibly, should we say, but does it affect it in some manner that is measurable because of the incident that's taken place? Whatever energies have been utilized to locate one item from one place to another affects the environment in some way, which could be measurable. We also look at debris spread. When items fall off, or in this particular case, there was this lovely vase was about $300. It had only been purchased about a week or so prior to the incident, but the debris spread was pointing towards the location of which it came. And what we found is that by no normal circumstances did the debris spray match the location of just being dropped from the counter. In other words, it had to have traveled in an opposing direction to from where its resting place was to cause the debris spray to face the location. There were things like this happening quite a lot, and normally out of sight, which is typical for poltergeist type disturbances. But we do monitor a lot of the different environmental things that are going on in relation to phenomena, and we can say that even there's been suggestions by numerous other researchers that maybe the moon and the magnetics come into play. It doesn't, as far as I'm aware. I mean, you can see our graphs here on different occasions from looking at spikes of activity, which doesn't play out in association to where the moon's position is, or if it's waxing, waning, full or not. It just does not follow any form of predictive path whatsoever. So it doesn't seem that you get heightened phenomena under those certain environmental attributes. This particular camera is quite interesting. It's a CCTV camera, but it takes a photograph if something passes in front of it, or if it recognizes some difference by measuring the pixels. It looks for differences, and when it sees a difference, it takes a photograph. You can take a photograph in 12 milliseconds. This thing, it's incredible. And what happens then? It alerts you on your phone or your laptop. It dings and lets you know a photograph's been taken. In this particular case, the client had it in the lounge, facing the lounge door, which he'd found open on occasion for no apparent reason. And whilst we were there, and there was the three of us in his kitchen, this piece of equipment sent a message to his laptop that he'd taken a photograph whilst we were there. So we looked at the photograph, and all we could see was white. We couldn't see any image of the room at all, in fact. So we went into the room, the lounge, where this item was, and it was actually facing the wall. It wasn't actually facing this direction, facing directly the wall, and the white on the image of the photograph was in fact nothing more than the wallpaper in the background. What was interesting is that it didn't take a photograph in between the action. It immediately went from that position, seemingly, to facing the wall, because no photographs were taken in transition. And taking into consideration how fast this camera can operate, it's strange that that action wasn't photographed, the movement action. In this particular case, we can only assume that the camera went from its location as it is there to facing the wall less than 12 milliseconds, which is an incredible speed. Or if it was even instant, we don't know. If it disappeared or reappeared, we don't know. But one thing is for sure, that no transitional photographs were taken at the time of that particular movement action, which was intriguing. We also have used specialized lasers, infrared lasers, which break beams, sets off an alert. That happened on a couple of occasions. We actually found ourselves chasing footsteps which were running away from us. We couldn't see anybody, but we could hear them running. And they actually broke 2 beams in the process of trying to get away from us, which was interesting. And they are quite interesting pieces of equipment, and they do operate quite well when the beam is broken. Now, assuming that the beam is being broken by a heat differential as it passes through, and definitely not only picks up us, but also picks up random paranormal alerts, I believe, as well. But when we do any investigation in homes, we take a photograph and videos at the same time. And this is basically because we know that the camera and the photographs always act differently. And as you can see on this particular video, there was a strange, unusual shape here on the wall, and it wasn't there on the photograph. We know the shadowing effect and what's happening here because we know where the light source is coming in, but we just can't. The angle of this particular shadow is off as well. It should be like the shadows in the same line as other pieces of equipment, the table, the equipment shadows. You can see the angles here, it's a bit better. You can see the angles here. And of course, you've got this. I don't know what that is, if it's a figure, if it's shadowy, I'm not too sure. But it shows that taking a photograph and a video can act differently. They completely act differently. The photo was taken at the same time as the video footage. The video footage didn't capture anything the photograph did. So it just goes to show that further experiments are required in this area. And this is a good reason to do both simultaneously. Photograph, video. If you've got a dual camera system that can do both, that's brilliant. Because sometimes you get anomalies that differ between them. And this is a perfect example of that, with no explanation for it. Water manifestations in Rochdale in 1996. This was Rochdale City Council contacted us. The family were being plagued by water formings and poltergeist-type disturbances. It was during the summer, August of 1996. Britain actually had a heat wave. We hadn't had any water from the sky for about 2.5, 3 weeks, and that was incredible for the UK. And it was very hot as well. So we actually saw this water forming. It was very odd. It actually purposely moved around and arced around the light switch, the light ceiling, should we say. And it did seem as if it had some intelligence to it. But up in the loft, though, it's dry, it's dusty. There's no water there. There's no pipes there. This is a prefabricated bungalow. And we ended up taking an analysis sample of the water and along with a sample from the tap. So we got a test sample. And what came back from Northwest Water Laboratories is the fact you can see certain things, calcium, magnesium, sodium chloride. That's because it's on the surface of the ceiling. It's these minute microscopic particles in there that seeped into the water. But what is interesting is this bit here. The conductivity of that water was 1,323 UCCSMs. Now, we were told the normal tap water is about 181. And that's about normal, really, about the 190 range throughout Manchester and Rochdale, and the amount of conductivity you would have. I mean, of course, conductivity is always electrical charges in water, especially if copper pipes have been used anyway. But to have a UCSM for 1,323, Mr. Kevin Platt, from the customer support team at Northwest Water Laboratories, thought that was very unusual and rung it with a question mark. He hadn't seen that before. So questioning as to why we got so much conductivity in that sample is profound. And there are people who have said that poltergeist phenomena does have electrical discontent or electrical disturbances to it. And maybe that leads us somewhere down the road that why we might have a certain difference in conductivity between the only natural source of water getting in the house, which was tap water, which was 181, compared to 1,323. Strange voices and things are recording. This was an investigation at Chingle Hall in Preston. It had been an uneventful evening. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. It was in the summer. The birds were singing. The sun was just coming up. Investigators decided to pack up. And what happened is that there was a scream that was heard so loud that it frightened them to death, the investigators. And there was this big blotch here, was this paranormal sound, and these two spikes here. Well, there's been 2 female investigators screaming after hearing it, which they never went back actually to Chingle Hall. But the sound was heard in every room, according to the people there. People who were in the kitchen thought it happened there, or people upstairs thought it happened there. They all identify it happening in the room they're being in. Investigated and analysed by Manchester University, they concluded that it wasn't normal vocals that were being used here. It was like electronic, but to the ear, you wouldn't tell the difference. And they recognised that there was probably around about 20 non-human vocals in the bank of a scream here. And of course, the two girls, which were identified very easily by these spikes. But what we sometimes hear with our ears is a replica. It doesn't add up when you look through the analysis. Doesn't look to be vocal frequencies. They seem to be some type of generated sound to match what we think we're hearing. This happens time and time again, and has been reported quite often with different people. There's been investigations of incendiary effects, things are suddenly burning. This was a picture that suddenly ignited. This was just a heat spot that ignited in a house in Leicester where they were having paranormal disturbances. And this particular photograph started off. This was a trigger photograph from a piece of equipment. Nobody was in there at the time, it was sealed off. And it took a snapshot of some type of ring of, well, smoke or something, which seemed to come down and become strongly manifested here. It isn't a strap. We have no idea what that could be. Absolutely no idea. And you can see this is from the test, from the analysis carried out, how the photograph was taken within 6 seconds, and all the tests that were carried out to prove it is not a strap. Whatever this is unknown. We have no idea what that could be. But it was enough to trigger the camera to take the photograph very quickly. There was other disturbances there. I mean, the particular gentleman was being literally tortured by what is assumed to be paranormal phenomena. He was being held down. You can see the finger parts are being held down, and he woke up with this particular mark on one day on his chest, and it is not a pressure mark. It was there for 3.5 weeks. It is not a pressure mark from lying on, because it's the wrong shape, wrong size, and it looks to have nails, to be honest with you. It's a very unusual, and it's not, I don't think it's pareidolia. I mean, it actually does look like a handprint, a sort of clawed hand. And it was I'm ashamed to say, though, that about 6 weeks after this was taken, his partner came in from work, and she found him on the floor in the kitchen, and he'd suffered a massive heart attack, which had unfortunately shut down most of his vital organs. He was rushed into hospital, and he remains there to this day. He's never going to recover from this. But the paranormal disturbances were very severe in this home. The phenomena followed them to the shops, and he was always being pushed. On one occasion, he got pushed into a shelf at a supermarket so hard that he cut the bridge of his nose on the shelf, which was bleeding quite badly. This phenomenon pursued him for quite some time. Since this incident of him having this heart attack and being in hospital, he hasn't had any further disturbances, which was interesting. But we do know things can happen. Marks can appear on the skin. You know, we know through stigmata, when two researchers did some great research and worked out that Christ was likely nailed through the wrists than the palms. You know, that 43% of stigmatics, the phenomena moved. So we do know that this is a form of self-induced spontaneous physical marking in many cases, SISPM. Even people under hypnosis, you can place a 10-pence piece on their arm, and if you tell them it's hot, some of them can blister. And again, it just goes to show that through the power of belief, physical marks can happen on the body, but we don't believe the gentleman prior. We don't believe that's the case here. I think it's something quite different. But there are people who have had profound experiences. Stella Lansing, Dorothy Izzard, 1974, 1961 were capturing phenomena on film, cinefilm camera, of faces. This was actually one gentleman with a turban on taken from the Skull Expo in 98, and this is one from Stella Lansing with a gentleman with the turban on as well. And the photographs, the video footage showed marks that seemingly crossed the frame from one frame to the other. Scientists couldn't work out what they, either of them were recording. They'd suddenly have the urge to get up and go and record, and they would film people, strange beings, balls of light, UFOs. Basically, these two people were doing exactly the same thing around about the same time. Stella Lansing still was doing it for a long time. I believe Dorothy Is passed away now, from what I've been recently told. But some people are seemingly be able to capture that other reality, and in this case, using cinefilm of all things. But we're dealing with phenomenology, which covers a lot of different things: psychic phenomena, metaphysics, supernatural, spiritual, paranormal. It's all rolled in there. And when I said at the beginning that the paranormal is a tricky word, it covers so much. We like to encompass it all and call it phenomenology. And I think it's good not to break it down, really, because we've got to consider the realities around us. You know, like snails, you know, kind of live in the present. Insects live, you know, like for instance, an ant-man, past and present, two-dimensional world. We're living in this area here, this third dimension. But what is there on the next bit, the multi-dimensional of realities? Our UFOs, our paranormal, and other strange things lie in that reality. And occasionally we have those glimpses. We also know now that studies into the double slit experiment shows that, you know, that atoms, electrons change and differ and act differently when we're observing them. Hence, you know, poltergeist disturbances, when we thought we saw a cushion move on the settee a little bit during one particular case, in a poltergeist case. We locked our eyes onto this cushion, it did not move until we took our eyes off and it flung itself across the room. Do we, just by observing these effects, change the reality and the movement of them? You know, we always ask the question, why do they always tend to do things off camera when we're not looking at them? You know, I mean, the fact is that, are we somehow affecting the action by viewing it, by watching the event unfold? You know, we have to start questioning things like this, right down to the electrons now, right down to the atoms, about how we might be affecting them just by simply observing them. We also know, when it comes to the phenomenon of observing, research into AI, you know, it's incredible about all talk about consciousness now. And there was recent experiments that took place in India. India said hello to 3 other people in France. The greetings weren't spoken, typed, or text. This communication happened between the brains. It was telepathy. It was telepathic communication. There are people who have the capabilities of doing this, have been done under experimental conditions a number of times. But how much is it about the consciousness? You know, when we start to even look at the aerial phenomenon, and this is why I mentioned this right at the beginning, you know, the paranormal aspects covers everything. You know, in regarding aerial phenomena, the phenomenon is capable of measuring the observer's intent, because phenomena like this sometimes doesn't appear in the sky when you've got a camera. Sometimes when you put the cameras away into the trunks, into the boots, and lock things up, suddenly something manifests, seemingly aware of our actions. So occasionally that has happened, and it's happened to myself whilst on particular investigations, that these things definitely have a conscious connection with the observers. We also know from pilots which have been chasing UFOs, you know, they seemingly go and try and lock on with their equipment when they're given a shoot down order on these things, go and shoot them down. And all of a sudden, the object does a maneuver as if they know what the military pilot's thinking. And again, it's seemingly evidence of this conscious connection between the phenomena of UFOs and the observer effect. It is no different than the phenomena of paranormal and the observer effect. It's seemingly one of the same. When we talk about entities, we talk about UFO beings and stuff, you know, it never started in the subject of ufology. It started in the subject of the paranormal. We've got Aleister Crowley's 1918 incident with Lamb. You know, we've got Blue, and there was more than one of these guys as well, by the way, that appeared on film during the Skulls experiments. The communications from the Vril Society back in the days of the Second World War. You know, these are all communications through forms of mediumship, seances, communicating with alleged entities from other dimensions or other worlds. This is where these things first turned up, not in the subject of UFOs. We also know that the human eye works in a certain way, ocular resonance at about 18 hertz. There's light recognition is around about 17 milliseconds. Anything that's going to go 17 milliseconds or faster, we're not going to be able to tell the color properly of it. This can vary slightly also in individuals because we don't all observe exactly the same. And there is infrasound. Phenomena of the paranormal, phenomena of the ufological can produce infrasonic sounds. We know that because insects fall quiet at the time of UFO sightings. Why? Because there's an infrasonic sound being generated. And the insects are aware of that. They can hear it, think it's a predator, and they fall quiet. We also measured exactly the same thing known as the ghost or fear frequency, generated by phenomena as well. So we know that both sides of these, be it ufological or paranormal, whatever this phenomenon represents, they have the capabilities of generating infrasonics. And we have these problems. If everybody can see an image of Christ here. Now, we get a lot of these types of images. In fact, I'll tell you what you're actually looking at there. You're actually looking at a dog's bottom. And don't even ask me why this person took a picture of his dog's bottom. That's probably another phenomenon. But never again, pareidolia exists everywhere. Everywhere. People want to see what they can see. And of course, the brain has a natural way of processing the image into something meaningful. I wouldn't expect to see Christ in this location, unfortunately. Items that fall and should make a certain noise have been manipulated by the paranormal. This item, which was very small, fell and made a 62 decibel sound. Replicating the exact incident only generated 39 decibels. We couldn't match it. In other words, that sound was amplified for our attention. We also see this in in Dr. Barry Colvin's work in the Untitled Poltergeist wrappings, because he attempted to manufacture exactly the same sounds, and yet they looked and acted completely different, just as they do here. Phenomena can manufacture sound and manipulate it. We also know that phenomena can generate sound, which two or three people might hear, and recording equipment doesn't capture it, and vice versa as well. When recording equipment captures it and nothing is heard at the time. We get that a lot regarding EVPs. When we did our test with EVP, we had Olympus, these guys, working with us. We had these guys monitoring the equipment that they manufactured, and they couldn't answer the question. How does it get on there if you can't hear it? These things aren't built for non-harmonics. They're built for harmonic range. And if we don't hear something and it records it, how do they record? Well, I'll tell you how they record. We discovered something referred to as displacement, where the phenomena actually places it directly onto the devices. The phenomena can target these devices and put whatever they want. A girl's voice on one, a boy's voice on the other, clicking on another, simultaneously at the same time in a clear and quiet environment. Phenomena transplaces directly onto these pieces of equipment as they can transplace into us, hearing. We know that people can do this because we have cochlear implant devices now for people who have had problems hearing and not been able to hear for a long time or born deaf. And these cochlear implants can be fitted which replicate frequencies for that person to hear. Is some form of replication happening when people hear things? Because they're not hearing it harmonically, they're hearing it directly into their heads. Because if 2 or 3 people say we heard something, but none of the recording devices picked it up, how did they hear it if the ear is not being utilized? So we have to look more into the area of transplacement as well now, that we ourselves are pieces of equipment, just as these are. When conducting EVP or instrumental transcommunication tests, we also have to consider we are equipment as well. And that these things, which have been recorded under 2 feet of water, which have been recorded in sealed containers, in vacuum containers, they seemingly can put words onto these devices directly as a form of transplacement. And we know paranormal phenomena is rife in UFO phenomena cases as well, like the very well-known Skinwalker Ranch incidents that took place was rife with paranormal disturbances taking place at the time of ufological encounters. They do have areas which go hand in hand. And I've said to people, to look at these subjects, you've got to encompass the whole thing to understand the phenomena's capabilities. You cannot say, oh, well, I'm not interested in that side. You can't have the UFO guys saying, I'm not interested in the ghosty side. We've got to look at the phenomena as a general and what it can represent. And as we see, just as aliens appearing in a bedroom, not being able to move, paralysis, or shadow person in a bedroom, not being able to move, paralysis, the same phenomena is triggering or manipulating our physiological and psychological aspects of our brains and our bodies for us to be induced into some form of paralysis. We know that objects can appear and turn in mid-flight. You know, things are beyond the normal physics, the metaphysics of what we might say. Things that suddenly just shouldn't move or corner in flight can do during poltergeist disturbances. We knew that when Steven Spielberg did his Close Encounters movies, he wanted to make sure that, you know, these true accounts that he was gathering to put this into the movie, that there was the paranormal aspect in there. You know, when she's at home and all the kitchen explodes into life, the taps are turning on, the Hoover's working on its own. Steven Spielberg wanted to make sure that, you know, he was not ignorant that there are paranormal things attributed to the UFO phenomena, even poltergeist type disturbances. We know from the Philip experiment that took place in 1972 that they were able to manifest some type of apparition, a ghost in the sense of speaking, just through the power of belief. You know, so we have to question, do we have the capabilities of conjuring phenomena? You know, when we talk about C-SETI-5 training, you know, where Stephen Greer was a researcher in the UFO field, he gathers 5 people who meditate and they sit together until something is conjured. What is conjuring is light formations, UFOs. But we have to ask, how much are we responsible for the interaction and conjuring of this phenomena? Is 5 people meditating in a circle on a beach, hoping for a UFO to manifest? Or 5 people sat around a table during a sitting, hoping a ghost might manifest? Are they really that different? I think we really need to take a serious look at the attributes here of what these phenomena represent, because they are seemingly one of the same thing. We have these things in the skies over Mexico, balls of light. We had balls of light reported as Foo Fighters during the Second World War. These balls of light were visible, the size of a football, visible balls of light which cast shadows of brightness around, seen and photographed in that very first case I took on by the Ministry of Defence in their building. This is what was photographed. This is what was being seen, moving around intelligently through doorways. You know, never passed through walls. It went down staircases, it went through into offices, it went through open doors and out of them, intelligent movement. You know, what are these? If they were seen outside that environment, you'd refer to them as a UFO. Inside the environment, they become something paranormal. And what is really interesting, I think we were probably one of the first guys to investigate an apportation. The difference between mug A and mug B here should be nothing, except mug B is the one that was the apport, which came from a set of 4 mugs. So there's a normal mug, and there's mug B, which is the apported. It feels the same, it weighs the same, it looks the same. By all intents and purposes, it is the same until you put it under the microscope. When you start to look at the difference, this is what we had here. 9.6 milligauss against 0.8. This is the 0.8, this is 9.6. And you can see the difference here in the radiation levels. The weight difference was no different. Duration of the apportation was 96 minutes. Temperature difference of 21 degrees there on this particular apportation. Normal temperature of the book was 6 degrees. And it displaced. When a displacement takes place, it's a regular amount of movement between where the object would rest and the object was located. So point A, point B of the apport, where it originally was, where it was located, measure the distance. Because when you do so, you start to see reoccurring information, like 47.8 inches. But when you put it under the microscope, there's a big difference between A and B. You can see normally that the mug, you know, the ceramics of the mug through the manufacturer looks a certain way. And of course, it looks considerably different under the microscope. And what we were doing here is we're doing types of scanning, electron microscopy is what we refer to. We also use atomic force microscopy and polarized light to get the readings we wanted. And what we discovered was there was a huge diathermic reaction in the apported mug. Now, We might feel the same, look the same, weigh the same, but you have to question now, is it really the same? Is it the same mug that disappeared? Exactly, because we would not know if we couldn't put it under the microscope. We would have been assumed it's the same mug as it left, but it wasn't. It came back different. And what's also interesting is that when you remove these items from the house, you get a suppression in phenomena. When you remove the apportations from the house immediately, you get a suppression in phenomena. We've done this countless times. When you leave those items in the house, phenomena continues at its normal rate or increase. One of the two at that rate, at that stage of the poltergeist infestation. So are we somehow, by removing that item from the house, somehow causing a bridging effect between the phenomenon and the location to suppress, by removing that apport from that location? Now, we had seen that diathermic reaction before, and I thought, where have we seen it before? Well, when a UFO was reported to manifest close to the ground, it affected the plants. This was a case in Ireland. And it affected the plants so much that the plants went off for analysis. And this was referred to as the biological traumatology of the plants. And when they analysed the plants, what did they find within it? Exactly the same diathermic reactions. So are we saying here then that the manifestation of a UFO and the manifestation of a mug might be utilizing the very same physics that's involved in the materialization and dematerialization process? We have to look at this more solidly between these two things, because I believe there's a lot more connected between the paranormal and ufological than what we can ever imagine. You know, when we talk about iron, you know, iron has been used for thousands of years to ward away paranormal phenomena. You know, the lucky horseshoe was nothing about luck. It was about the iron. It was about warding away the paranormal. Using iron nails around beds, you know, to ward away bad spirits. You know, wearing pendants of iron. You know, even Tutankhamun's iron dagger was apparently utilized so he could battle the spiritual side if necessary. You know, these things, hematite, you know, have been utilized around the world for warding away evil or spirits or whatever you might refer to them. And we ask our question, even in medieval times, they knew to use raw iron to separate the realities usually from graveyards and churches. You know, there was a common knowledge about an adversity to iron. Now, I'll say this because we use it. We utilize iron to suppress phenomena. We utilize iron, and it has to be raw iron in the environment where the most disturbances are happening. And we also utilize UV light. We never, ever utilize infrared, and seemingly only affects the area as opposed to suppress it. And what we discovered over a period of time is that it works. It actually does work. Now, I have no idea about the physics behind it. I've looked at the resonant frequencies and things like that. Maybe it's something to do with that. No idea. But this isn't my idea. This idea comes back from thousands of years ago. You know, farmers were driving iron rods into the fields to make sure that, you know, the spirits somehow wouldn't attack their animals at night, you know, or strange lights would come down to keep the lights away. You know, there's thousands and thousands of stories involving how iron has been utilized, put over cribs to stop the children from being taken at night. You know, so, and it does seem an attribute, something to do with iron and ultraviolet. There's something there that needs seriously looking at in scientific institutes in regards how and why it does somehow suppress disturbances. And we've just come into the end now. In the Smithsonian magazine 2011, Dr. Lisa Randall, and I actually talked with her, she's very interesting. Dr. Lisa Randall from Harvard University said, "I believe in an extra dimension may exist close to our familiar reality, hidden except for bizarre sapping of strength of gravity as we see it. That sapping of gravity as we see it, we have now under Project Doorway, which is my project along with a number of colleagues, researchers, over a 4-year period of time traveling to 8 different countries, have managed to identify and measure the gravity wells that phenomena leaves behind on manifestation. Sometimes the micro, sometimes the macro, but they can be managed to be identified through specialized pieces of equipment, and also sometimes on occasion time displacement. Time displacement meters also are used. So in conclusion, the Buddhist community have always embraced the idea of contact with beings from other realities, no matter what type of beings they are. They claim to have been doing it for centuries. And I'll just finish on a quote here from the Holiness of 14th Dalai Lama. To think is to create. Imagination becomes reality. And that speaks a lot. That tells us a lot about how much we actually might be involved in return in regarding this cooperation that we might have with phenomena. Thank you very much.
That was excellent, Steve. Thank you very much. Can you stop sharing your screen now? If you just do, that's it, Scott's done it. Excellent, thank you. I didn't want to interrupt you because it was so fascinating, but I'm sure we've got lots of questions for you. And let me just go over the ones that's come over in the chat. Now, David Porter and Peter Braun have spoken about the Battersea Poltergeist. For those of you who haven't heard, it's being promoted just now as a BBC Sounds podcast, which will be on next week, I think. And it will also be on Radio 4 in the Easter time. So that's the Battersea Poltergeist. I think David said he was reading about it just now. But Maureen Smith said she knew of a recent case in Rutherglen. Maureen, do you want to speak about that? Let me see if I can find Maureen, and I'll unmute her.
I've unmuted myself.
You have, thank you. Excellent, good.
No, actually, it's just a couple of minutes away from me, and my son was at school with the boy, and it's a single parent and a boy. It was quite widely published, and they had to get an exorcist in from the Catholic Church, and there was various apportations and things. Now, I know that family, and to me, they're very, very normal, not prone to things like that at all. But it all went sort of quiet after that, and quite astonishing that arises from like just normal circumstances, and then it arises and then it goes away. But I know that family, and I believe what they said.
Absolutely, yeah. The thing is with poltergeist disturbances, or the unusual disturbances where the church comes in. I mean, the church are actually only 12% successful. They actually say on the last statements they said, they don't put that out often, but they're only 12% successful. You normally have to return to places on many occasions. But then it's a matter of, I think you charge the family up. In other words, you take control of your whole home in a psychological sense, and if you can put that belief into individuals, you empower them to do so. And if you believe it, you make that, you can actually do that in a physical sense in your own home.
And then the interesting thing about it is there was a teenager involved. It was somebody, as I said, it was at school with my son. And he did have some issues, that boy, to be honest. But there was also the fact it must have been centered on him, because apparently when he was at school, he made some chairs move that were near to him. And it was. I mean, what makes something like that go away suddenly? I don't know.
Sometimes significant changes in a life can. Statistics have shown that when it comes to poltergeist type disturbances, that affects people in homes where they have some type of traumatology already taking place. It could be financial difficulties. It could be bad living situations. There could be a handful of different things that are involved.
Yeah.
Statistics show that that's the case. But when significant things take place in a house, changes, especially when they come out of the shell because other people are visiting and getting to know investigators and things like that, even that alone can change, because the individuals that might have some correlation with the phenomena might suddenly start to feel differently, might affect the phenomena itself.
The interesting thing about that is that there were quotes from the police unofficially saying that the police were traumatized by what they had seen. Interestingly enough, which included a levitating chihuahua that had ended up on top of a 6-foot hedge.
Yeah, I've seen
I know that chihuahua. Do you know what I mean? It just seems absolutely mind blowing that, whatever.
Thank you, Maureen. Thanks, Steve, for that. Now I can see. Hold on just a second. Alan, were you Alan Hannah? Can you unmute yourself? Alan, can you just unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted now.
Yep, you're okay. I can hear you now. Yep.
Thank you, Steve, for a fascinating lecture. Have you any experience or evidence of poltergeist activity injuring or physically harming anybody?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's only in the severe cases. I mean, we're only assuming it is poltergeist at that stage. You know, when I was taught, we were taught that poltergeist is like a rule book. There is a mechanism. You know, it's like an intelligence because they form a pattern, being starting up from audible disturbances to object manipulation, to physical interactions, apparitional stages. You know, they can tend to appear as blobs of light or darkness. And they always seem to follow the same path as if there's a rule book, a mechanism. And it is that mechanism that fascinates me. It's this mechanics of it, because there is something like that, like a rule book there that they're following. Now, when it gets to severity cases, high frequency, high severity cases are always important to us. People have been injured. I mean, we've come across cases where people have been. We had one girl who was only 19, one of the twin actually. She was pushed down the stairs by this thing. She broke her ankle. I had her mum on the phone screaming at me, you know, that she just got back from the hospital with her. You know, yes, these things can happen. And at that point in time, we always have to consider the witnesses. The witnesses are so important. This isn't about going in and getting a photograph. It's not about going in and getting a video for the next video greatness on YouTube. It's about the people. You know, it's about making sure this 19-year-old girl's, you know, is absolutely petrified. It's making sure that we deliver the right amount of help to these people. Sometimes it has to involve churches. Sometimes it has to involve counselors. But a lot of it happens confidentially, and we guys in research don't get to find out, because there's a lot of things happening in the background that we don't get out in the field because of confidentiality assurance. But yes, in some cases, and the most people which are, could say, attacked or go through these incidents are people more devout, believe it or not. The most persecuted people are the devout people. And history will tell you that especially through Vatican papers on those type of things, also confirm that.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Now, let me see. Margot Johnson, I think you've probably answered this question, but she asks, can you remove a presence from a house? And you're saying you've written the manual on it. Do you want to further speak on that one?
That's a tricky question. It is the ultimate question, can you get rid of? You know, we will never, ever stipulate that. You know, and I don't think anybody should ever stipulate that, because, you know, there is a certain amount of free will. I mean, do you know what? I don't believe us. You know, they all have to go, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, I think the whole aspect of when the church comes in, it's always begone evil spirit. And it's like, you know, I feel sorry for them sometimes. You know, maybe they just want to hang out. Maybe they just like the kids. Maybe they just like to have, you know, feel around people. You know, who knows? But we have this idea in our heads that if we've got something in the house, it's got to be evil. It's got to go. This is my turf. You know, sometimes we have to consider, sometimes we're living on somebody else's turf. You know, and we in occasions, we might imprint into the environment ourselves, you know, to some degree, consciously, you know. So especially if there's heightened energy, be it good or bad, seems to be the key thing that's associated to recorded events. But I would say no, I would never say I could get rid of. But we have seemingly done so by utilizing certain methods. We never announce it, because you can't, you know, you could always argue the fact that, well, how do we know it's the same thing? It came back, it might have disappeared for an hour and something else jumped in. You know, it's very problematic. I don't think anybody should actually stipulate we should get rid of or can get rid of. But there has been cases when we have suppressed to the point of getting of no phenomena happening. And there are a number of key ways to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm moving on quickly because there's a lot of questions. Peter Braun, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, because you made two comments on Rendlesham Forest and also the Travis Walton abduction. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, okay. But before that, can I just comment on the Rutherglen Poltergeist? I just looked it up in the Daily Record, and regarding the Chihuahua that was left on top of the 7-foot hedge, It's quoted here that so shocked by the incident were the officers said to be that the situation was even discussed at a high level. Sorry. Confidentiality, again, in relation to the Rutherglen case, Steve, I noticed that the Daily Record chooses to have a picture of the house and the address, which I think is breaking every protocol that should apply around cases, and I'm sure you would agree. Yeah, I was reacting to things that Steve was talking about as he was going through it, and the idea of balls of energy, so on, that behave strangely, that it's multi-witnessed in the case of the Rendlesham Forest incidents, which happened over 3 consecutive nights in Christmas 1980. On the second night, a female officer called Bonnie Tamplin was driving with Master Sergeant Bobby Ball towards a reported sighting at the East Gate when their vehicle was overturned because a ball of blue light actually came through the windscreen and caused the vehicle to overturn. And then the third night at the staging post, when the area was full of all sorts, mostly American military going into the forest to try and, put an end to this UFO nonsense, and then finding that they were dealing with this UFO nonsense all night. At one point, a light appeared in the sky, came down and shot through again the windscreen of a vehicle, causing the guy inside to have a nervous breakdown. So there are many cases on record of that kind of thing happening.
Okay,
did you want to say something else? And I can't remember the other thing. The other thing was just another observation about iron, which is very, very prominent in Irish folk culture, about repelling fays, shall we call them. They can be called leprechauns, they can be called all sorts of other spirit names, but it's a long established prophylactic against spirits.
Yeah, it goes back thousands of years. In fact, it's introduced in almost every country to some degree. In the Middle Eastern, utilize hematite, which is pretty much like 90% iron, I think it is, for doing the same thing regarding, keeping the jinn away, should we say, the bad folk. We call them the fae, the bad folk, whatever they are. They have many different masks and many different names, but it's seemingly the one phenomenon. In medieval times, it was considered, it went rife, regarding now the protection of iron. When they first started doing exorcisms, the power of the cross. So they say the power of the cross because they're manufactured from raw iron, these crosses, and they utilized, the iron and the words, or the power words, should we say, and it's G and Zeus, there were lots of different things utilized to help rid phenomena. Iron was one of them first used in the Vatican regarding the exorcism. It's all over the place, and it's still intrinsically, we still utilize it. People put horseshoes up. It's not for good luck, to ward away the bad spirits. Iron's all over the place, and yes, it is right by saying it was utilized quite heavily in Ireland, but it has been all over the world. It's interesting how that concept traveled so far.
Well, just to finish, one of our company here tonight was a direct experiencer of astonishing events, the most astonishing I've ever heard in paranormality, of the Skull experiments.
Yes, yeah, it's incredible.
I think he's keeping a low profile at the moment, probably.
I'm going to ask Jake Beckett to unmute himself. I know we're over time, so Jake, just let us hear your experience before we close.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I lived in a caravan for. I'll turn my video on as well. So I lived in a caravan for 4 years or so, and I would lie in bed, and about 1.5 meters, 2 meters in the ceiling, I would lie at night and I hear it kind of like that, and I thought, oh well, it's probably like a squirrel, like something outside. No, I thought, it keeps happening over like months, and
Move a little nearer to the microphone.
Can you hear me at all? Yeah,
that's better.
You know what?
I can hear you, Jake. I'm following it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'll just turn up the input volume, I think.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I could hear it going scratch, and I thought, okay, this is strange, but I just ignored it, you know, and continuously I would go to sleep and forget about it, and then it would appear maybe like a few days later. I don't know, months went by, and then one evening I decided to get up, and I followed it to the corner of to the corner of the kitchen unit, and I could kind of see it or feel it in the corner of where the work surface and the corner of the two panels of the caravan curved round, and I thought, okay, there's something there, and then I said hello, and it started going like, and then like that, and I could just hear it, and I could speak to it and ask it questions and say things, and it would respond with a kind of ebb and flow of energy, and then you know, it kind of tailed off, and then I went to bed, and then I woke up, and then maybe I had like some subtle interactions with it over the next few months at times, and then it just kind of disappeared out of my life. So yeah, that was that.
Interesting. You know, people do report that. You know, I've always suggested though to children not to have the encouragement of conversing or trying to converse with these things, because sometimes we don't know what they are. You know, and not everything is love and light, you know, and sometimes people do have, you know, bad experiences. So I think, you know, when parents say, "Oh, my 6-year-old's talking to somebody in the bedroom," you know, and I'm trying to get him to find out who it is, you know, people do the wrong thing sometimes by encouraging their own children to step forward, because children are very good. You know, this is as if the blinkers are not, you know, the blinkers haven't always been put on until sometimes around about, you know, between 6 and 9 years of age. But you know, they can on occasion, you know, be wrongly put into situations by the parents just about because of being intrigued with this phenomenon. You know, there's a certain amount of caution in the schools with it.
Certainly. I mean,
okay.
yeah.
So sorry, I'm going to have to draw it to a close, but thank you, Jake, for sharing that experience with us.
Thanks, Jake. It was interesting.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Is Anne frozen? She'd done so well all night, you know.
So can I just, on behalf of everyone, can I thank Steve for an excellent talk and presentation? That was superb, and hope you'll come back again.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll come back.
And thank everyone here for being here. Let me just tell you that next week we have Professor Bernard Carr. Bernard's actually on tonight, so hi Bernard. He's a good friend of the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre too, so lovely to have him back.
Together.
Again, now bearing next week.
I think we've lost Anne.
I think we've lost Anne. Is there somebody who steps up for that?
And the consciousness
she's coming back in.
Survival. So
sorry, Anne, we lost you for a second.
Did you not hear any of that?
No.
We got as far as Bernard Carr.
Okay, well, I was just, if you can hear me now, I was just saying Bernard's online. He's been here this evening listening to the talk. He'll be here next week.
I think it might just be time to say goodnight, everybody. Thanks for coming, and thank you, Steve.
Okay. All right, thank you, guys. Look forward to you.
Very good.